Welcome everyone to our study of the Treasury of Precious Qualities, the great Jigme Lingpa's teaching on the practice of the path. So as always, kindly generate the motivation of bodhicitta, wishing to temporarily free all sentient beings from suffering and ultimately establish them in perfect enlightenment. And this aspiration reflects enlightenment. So we might think that's an awful lot of people. That's an awful lot of individuals. That's a very long time, presumably. And that's where we need to combine this aspiration with the insight into what enlightenment is. Enlightenment is the falling away of dualistic perception, time and space, and so on, and also the condition of delusion. So at that time, it's not really as if we're, as enlightened persons, we're not really thinking, oh gosh, that's a big slog. It doesn't really work like that. The enlightened nature is simply that it is always there for sentient beings. And as such, Buddhas, we would say, act spontaneously, pervasively, and permanently, pervasively, and spontaneously. You know, there's been a lot of completely aside, but anyway, let's keep that in mind. This is why we're here. But just I'd like to, there's been a lot of, at least in my neighborhood, a few sort of emails going around with regards to a very dear friend of mine, very old and dear friend, who was rumored to have passed away. Eric Pema Kunsang, he hasn't passed away. But there was a student in the Rigpa Sangha called Peter Pema Kunsang who passed away. So please pray for Peter Pema Kunsang. But Eric Pema Kunsang is actually all right. So just keep that in mind. All right, we'll begin with supplicating the Jigme Lingpa, the source of love and compassion for all beings, who knows all that is knowable, emanation of Longchenpa, heir to a treasury of mind tamas, sky-like yogin of the vast expanse of luminosity. Jigme Lingpa, at your feet we pray. So we are presently in the third chapter on karma. Just want to bring in the context, and I think I missed doing that last time. So we have basically three sections in this work here. The Treasury of Precious Qualities, part one. One is the first section, part one, turning the mind to the Dharma. And that's where we appreciate our precious human rebirth, understanding the context. And second is then part two, an incentive for the practice, which is then understanding the Dharma and the necessity, the fortune we have in having a human rebirth, but also its volatility, that it will pass. So that's an incentive for practice, for generating, we say, diligence in practice. And then the third part now, which is then the gradual path of the three kinds of beings. And these are then the beings who, one, wish to be happier, those who wish liberation, and those who wish perfect enlightenment for all sentient beings. So we're presently in the first kind, those that wish happiness within conditioned existence. And this then essentially focuses on then the ethical teachings in relation to the karmic law of cause and effect. So this is ethical action, the practice of understanding what we in fact can see, that actions have a consequence. But there's quite a bit of science around this, and this is where it's important for us, particularly then, as I've mentioned a few times in the modern context, where karma gets sort of hijacked and sort of associated with a rather simple-minded sort of like this action leads to that and so forth. And it becomes part of a discourse that very often identifies what we could call metaphysics or religion or these kind of sciences that really look at what really sort of happens in terms of our existence. In the modern discourse, they're very often, what can we call it, seen as being simplistic. And there's a little bit of an arrogant attitude around that. The implication is that, you know, there's nothing more than what we can see physically, and all this stuff about the mind passing on and consciousness and so on, that sort of can't really be understood, and don't try to, and those who claim that they have don't believe them and so on. So there's a very sort of arrogant dismissal of all of this in the modern discourse, and that's where something like karma sort of lands in that camp. And you very often then hear this sort of rather simplistic, sort of fatalistic even sometimes, you know, that's just your karma, you know, and that's where we have to be aware of karma is in everything. So we can't say, oh, well, that's your karma, as if there's some things that aren't our karma. Everything is karma. So almost to say that's karma is pretty superfluous. But to understand the science and the laws of karma is very helpful. We can't understand exactly the exact nature of all karma, just like we can't understand the nature of all the sort of the external appearances of the phenomenal world, but we can understand the laws that apply, and that's where we understand particularly karma in terms of cause and effect, obviously, you know, and then particularly what renders karma complex, and where karma then does not land in some camp of something simplistic. It's because we understand that karma is also the effect of an action is compounded by also the circumstances. So that's where we talk about Gyu, Kyen, and Drebu, cause, condition, and effect. You have apple seed, you have moisture, sunshine, the quality of soil, and so forth, all of which is condition. And then you have, yes, the predictable apple tree, but that apple tree depends so much on these conditions, right? So anyway, so we're presently looking at verse 25, and that's where we're going to look at how then actions play out, how the result of actions play out. So Jigme Lingpa writes, in 4 ways all these actions fructify. Their fruits are fully ripened, resembling their cause, proliferating, and conditioning. So these 4, so this is what we'll spend some time on. And Kangyur Rinpoche in his commentary then says, so we're presently then looking at the results of we're right now in the department of negative actions. So there's a lot of discussion around. We looked last time at the 10 negative actions, 3 of body, 4 of speech, and 3 of mind. And now we're looking at their results. And that's where then Kangyur Rinpoche comments, all of these actions have 4 kinds of karmic consequence. The fully ripened effect, the effect similar to the cause, the conditioning or environmental effect, and the proliferating effect. So the fully ripened effect, what we in Tibetan call namin jebu. So there's they need to be understood then. Sorry, am I getting ahead of myself here? Yeah, that I am getting ahead of myself. We just, okay, that's verse 25, simply just enumerates these 4. And so then Jigme Lingpa goes on then to explain what these consist of, and that's 26. Regarding then, and this is the first of these 4, regarding then the fully ripened fruit, whether all 5 factors have occurred or not, through motivation of 3 kinds, are beings thrown at best into the realms of beasts, or worst, into the realm of pretas, or worst of all, into the realms of hell. So these are, you could say, the full fructification of the full ripening of actions, negative actions specifically. So that's where, and this we've looked at before also, 5 factors associated with actions, like the intention before, whether we are conscious of something we're doing, whether we really want to do it, conscious of what it is that we're doing, and even at the end that we're happy about it. So there's 5 factors. These are: 1, motivation, virtuous or otherwise. So in the case of negative actions, then, that we are intending to harm, or in the case of doing something good, we intend to do something good. 2, perpetration, that we actually carry it through. 3, consciousness of the act. We actually are aware of that. Result of the act, it's completed, and then satisfaction at the finished action. So we can see this really makes a big, if we step on an ant, that doesn't come from an evil intent. There's a big difference between actually, if you really, I mean, some people take pleasure in killing, sadly, or they see something that moves, and they sort of like, like mosquitoes, that's intending to act, and sort of, yes, I got you, then the whole act actually, even though you might say it's just a mosquito, it actually contains all these 5. So that's where, walking, on an ant or whatever, when we're out, that's very different. There's no intention really to kill. Of course, there is a killing taking place, so there is some degree of action, some degree of something that has been done, but you could say these 5, you can see they're mostly all lacking. Really just stepping on an ant unconsciously is really just the second one, perpetration, but there's no consciousness, there is a result of the act, yes, it was completed, but there's no satisfaction, and there was no intention. All right, just to be clear on the complexity of this. However, so with regards to these 5, however, whether or not a given act possesses all these 5 factors, the fully ripened effect derives principally from the first, the motivation, and this may be of 3 kinds. The least of these is ignorance. For example, the killer's not understanding that it's wrong to take life. So that's the way you have, in all cultures, people who think that, that there's nothing wrong in killing others, on account of which the agent creates the cause for birth in the animal realm. So this is really just because it's part of the culture. Yeah, some of us I grew up in a culture where it was, a jolly great thing to do on a weekend, to go hunting, and that's just part of the culture. For many of these people, hunting, fishing, all of these, it's sort of like a nice way to communing with nature and so forth. So there's not necessarily that evil thing. So there is the ignorance. There is the actual killing, shooting, or fishing, or whatever it might be. So that's what creates the cause of birth in the animal realm. Worse than that is when killing is done out of a desire for meat, leather, horn, ivory, pearls, and so forth. That's very common. Somebody wishes all these produce. Here, the action will propel the agent into the realm of the pretas, however it goes. Worst of all is when killing is motivated by hatred or anger, as when someone murders an enemy. In that case, the action is of extreme gravity and will produce a birth in the hell realms. So this is supposedly fairly straightforward. Then the effect, similar to the cause. So the first is Namin Drebu, this is Gyutun Drebu, the effect similar to the cause. And here there's 4 slokas from Jigme Lingpa. Regarding then, did we just do that? 27? Yeah, sorry. Effects resembling their cause are of two kinds. First, actively, there is the inclination to repeat the act. Then passively, although a high rebirth is be gained, two experiences that reflect their cause to each one of the 10 non-virtues are successively assigned. One's life is short and filled with many ills. One's goods are few and shared with enemies. One's spouse is unattractive and takes sides with one's opponents. Assailed by slander, one is frequently deceived by others and has bad attendants who are hard to reconcile. One's words are disregarded and dismissed as unreliable. Many insults does one hear. One is immersed in strife. So I'm going to just rely on the commentary for this here. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, effects similar to the cause are experienced both actively and passively. In the first case, the result of acquiring a non-virtuous habit in previous existences is to have a temperament inclined to the same kind of negativity, together with a conducive life situation, so that the behavioral pattern naturally repeats itself. Okay, so we have a particular non-virtuous habit in a previous existence, and that then manifests in terms of that we basically continue these patterns. Let's see what this says here. Hunters may be reborn as beasts of prey, thieves as mice, and so on. Okay. So that's actively. Now we continue these actions. Passively, in the second case, even though positive karma may have resulted in birth in a higher realm, situations will be experienced that reflect the evil actions previously performed. Two specific kinds of suffering are associated with each non-virtuous action. The consequence of killing is a shortened life, dogged by illness. Stealing gives rise to poverty and the obligation to share the little one has with enemies. The result of sexual misconduct is to have an unattractive, argumentative, and slovenly spouse who will take up with one's enemies and in turn become hostile. Lying results in being abused and criticized, irrespective of deserts, as well as the liability to be betrayed by those in whom one has placed one's trust. Divisive speech is the cause of having a family, servants, and attendants who are ineffective and troublesome, quarrel among themselves and are difficult to reconcile. The results of worthless chatter is that nothing one says wins acceptance. One's words are dismissed as nonsense and as coming from an untrustworthy source. The result of having subjected others to verbal abuse is to be constantly attacked and scolded. Everything one does to help goes wrong and becomes the cause of further friction and suffering. Covetousness begets a situation of dissatisfaction with possessions and a desire for more, coupled with the anxiety that this will prove impossible. The result of harmful intention is that all sorts of difficulties seem to arise for no apparent reason: sickness, misfortune, enemies, and so forth, while at the same time relatives and possessions, all one's happy circumstances, simply vanish. Wrong views give rise to a lack of confidence in the Dharma and a tendency to stray to evil and untrue opinions. At the same time, one will have a crooked and deceitful temperament. So these are then how the 10 non-virtuous actions play out in terms of passive conditions, simply the conditions that one are given. So that's where one's given situation then are reflected here in terms of these the 10 negative actions that we have looked at before. Gosh, I do not know. My English, well, sort of usually gets me by, but I'm afraid I'm not entirely sure. Lying results in being abused and criticized, irrespective of deserts. Yeah, the Sahara. I don't think so. Desserts. What, cream custard pie? I'm not sure what this means. Some of you English speakers might be able to. What one deserves. Thank you very much. Great. What is the karma of doing laundry? When we wash on a high temperature, millions of little beings die. We don't see them, but we know now. Yes, well, this is the nature of samsara, that there's hardly anywhere where we're not engaging in some negative actions. Paul Rinpoche, in Words of My Perfect Teacher, he makes the point about tea. We think it's a sort of a, it's harmless to sit and have a cup of tea, but think where the tea comes from. The animals that died when the tea was harvested, all the sort of the animals that were crushed when in the old days you had these caravanserais that sort of traveled from China to Tibet. You know how many animals were crushed by these horses and mules and donkeys. All the profit and the lying that's being sort of practiced in the context of the commerce around the tea and so forth. So yes, it's sort of pervasive. All right, well, I learned a new word, irrespective of what one deserves. Deserts. Okay, thank you. The conditioning or environmental effect. So that's verse 31. Conditioning effects are linked with outer habitat. The burden of the evil deed of killing leads to cramped environments where healing trees and flowers are few, where crops and food and drink lack virtue and are indigestible, to places that are hazardous for life. So that's first. This has bearing on habitat and environment. So this is again the conditioner of environmental effect. This is Wangi Trebu. Making it a source of suffering is said in the Sadharmash Mrityu Pashtana Sutra. Appearances of body, possessions, joys, and sorrows, all are nothing but the mind's imagining, the stuff of dreams created by the mind. And again, in the Bodhicharya Avatara, we find, who has forged this burning iron ground? Whence have all these demon women sprung? All are but the offspring of the sinful mind. This the Mighty One has said. This, of course, always is rather sort of how do you say, prone to, you can understand women feel uncomfortable with this. And this, of course, is again addressed, I think it's the Holiness of the Dalai Lama. Recently, I think, they studied this verse, but makes the point. This is, of course, addressed to monks. So that's where sometimes the presence of women can be, can be an issue for the monks. Yeah, the mind wandering, and the general sort of issue of libido. But that also applies to the nuns, and similarly you would have the corresponding. So it simply just essentially refers to those that are the object of desire, men or women alike. But the point really here is that all is created by the mind. The entire realm of that we live in, and also our particular bodies, our experiences, and so forth, they all come from, in the case of the negative realms, obviously the negative mind. So we always remember, as sentient beings, we're born essentially, we carry with us the causes for experiencing a body, a realm, and the experiences. So that's what we call ne, dön, lysum. So that's where these three essentially are, you could say, part and parcel of our re-embodiment, life after life. So our particular actions shape our particular realm, body, and experience. And in this case, then, when we talk about negative actions, then we understand that all the negative bodies, realms, and experiences we have, this comes from the negative actions. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, the karmic residue of the cruel act of killing powerfully influences the environment in which one is born. This will be unpleasant and cramped, devoid of favorable circumstances. Medicinal trees and plants will be scarce. Crops will give poor harvests. Food and drink will lack their nutritive and thirst-quenching qualities and will repeatedly prove indigestible and the cause of sickness. The environment will be dangerous, with perilous rivers and canyons, enemies and wild beasts. The situation of having to live in harsh and frightening places is the result of killing. So this is where we understand that this is about us understanding that our actions have consequences. So it's about us right now being empowered to and being responsible for creating particular actions. Sentient beings not understanding that naturally will continually be perpetuating negative environments, perpetuating negative situations on the basis of just their ignorance. And that's why it's important, again, when it comes to this discussion of karma and how it sometimes can be used in a very silly way, is when people then would say, well, that's your karma, or that's their karma. That's the most sort of insensitive, ridiculous way of understanding karma, in that you can make some sort of categorical statement that there's nothing that's not karma. And so to refer to sort of basically the implication is that you just dismiss others' suffering, saying it's their fault. Well, it's not, because all sentient beings wander in samsara on the basis of essentially being confused. So when us sentient beings, we sometimes have the inclination towards what is positive, well, that's good, but it's still within the confused dualistic condition. It might create happiness for some time. Similarly, also, within the same condition of confusion, we might perpetuate negative actions that will create suffering for some time. So that's where everything really is about understanding that samsara is permeated by this condition of ignorance in which our actions have particular results. The point of teaching this is not that we all of a sudden can make sense of everything and make sort of little simplistic quips about why people are in this or that situation, but it's about us presently understanding that our actions and our particular motivation needs to be intelligently shaped by our present knowledge about how actions actually have ramifications. As you can see, having lived with Buddhists in the modern world and having heard one scandalous story after the other about people saying, well, that's just your karma, or, just being insensitive in using the word karma, then I I would like to make it very clear that we have to be sensitive with this information and use it for ourselves. Yeah. And in a world in which karma is generally not understood, well, we just end up making fools of ourselves if we sort of in public spaces start making comments about karma and so forth. So please don't do that. Be sensitive to the world around and understand that karma is not something that's generally understood. And just, be, be sensible. So 32. Theft brings birth in places where the crops are easily destroyed, where plants, though edible, give meager fruit, or are assailed by frost and flattened by the hail, where suffering of famine overwhelms the mind. Kangyur Rinpoche comments, the consequence of stealing is to be born in places where crops are scarce. What little there is fragile and easily destroyed. If edible fruits and so forth are available, they are of inferior quality, without goodness or savor. The cows, female yaks, and so on have no milk, and if crops manage to grow, they will be vulnerable to damage by frost or hail. Cattle will stray and get lost. Famine will threaten, and there is always the great anxiety that there will not be enough to eat and drink. So again, the point here is the understanding the consequence of stealing. 33. Sexual misdeeds engender irresistibly the creeping vine of birth in filthy swamps of excrements and urine, where breath is stifled by the unclean stench, in dirty, loathsome places narrowly confined. So the result of sexual misconduct is a living environment that is squalid and suffocatingly filthy, fouled with excrement and urine, such as cattle sheds and slums. The power of previous behavior inescapably plants the vine of human birth in fetid places where there is little ease and which one is trapped and obliged to live. So again, this is about us understanding consequences of our present actions and being motivated to pursue then positive actions. 34. Through lies, one has unstable wealth in unpropitious lands. Betrayed by others, one will live in dread, beset by fears. Slander and divisive speech bring regions full of gorges and ravines, steep defiles and chasms hard to cross. So Kangyur Rinpoche comments, the telling of lies produces great instability in personal influence and material fortune. Wherever one goes, one is at odds with the place and one is liable to be tricked by everyone, enemies, friends, and even people one does not know. Through a host of such adverse circumstances, the result is paranoia and a life full of nervousness and anxiety. As for divisive speech, this will provoke birth in stark and inhospitable places full of ravines and precipitous crags, where travel is difficult and full of inconvenience. Harsh words give rise to places filled with stones and thorns, tree stumps, evil-fruited, harsh and bad to taste, brackish waters, wastelands filled with dust and slag, mournful places, lands for sorrowing. Through pointless chatter, all one's toiling in the fields is fruitless, all is unpredictable, for in due season nothing comes. So harsh speech results in the experience of landscapes that are dry and stony, where even the fruit bushes are covered with thorns, where there is no gardens, but only barren tree stumps, where the crops are poor and powerless to nourish. In such places, deadly diseases abound, and good health is impossible. The water is not fresh and clear, but turbid and brackish. The ground is dusty and covered with filth. People are constantly tormented in such places. When nothing is gained, in spite of all one's toil, this is the consequence of idle chatter. Fields may be plowed, cattle raised, business pursued, but nothing comes of it. The spring seems to portend a plenteous harvest, but the autumn brings no fruit. The environment is unstable, and evil threatens. 36. Through covetousness, husk and grain are in their measure all reversed. One's time and place are bad and ill portents. Through wishing evil, one is born in lands oppressed by evil kings, preyed upon by robbers, savages, wild beasts, and deadly snakes. The fruits and harvest have a bitter, burning taste in regions prone to natural calamities. So covetousness produces the experience of places where the proportion of husk to grain is the inverse of what it should be. Even if the country has previously enjoyed prosperity, now the seasons are all topsy-turvy. Evil times are on their way, and suffering is in store. Because of evil intent, people are born to hardship in lands subjected to wicked overlords who oppress the people with violence and wars. They are vulnerable to attack from robbers, thieves, venomous snakes, savages, and wild beasts like leopards and tigers. The crops and fruit in such places are bitter and hot tasting. the physical condition is weak and the environment is constantly liable to natural calamities. Again, what we're reading here is an understanding that the environment reflects the actions that we have done in the past. So this should really motivate us to understanding. First of all, understand that that environment and the mind are very much linked up. This should enable us to understand again the condition of samsara, and again should lead to compassion for the condition of samsara, and also lead to us being discerning in our own action. We're not really, again, I want to emphasize, we're not using the law of karma as a way to sort of explain things that can't be, that presently look very difficult to reverse. So when people have a particular situation, they're stuck in a particular situation, yes, we can understand the condition of samsara, but it's not about us all of a sudden coming up with an explanation. It's more just understanding the dynamic quality of our actions. 37. Through wrong views, one is born in lands devoid of wealth, where healing trees and plants are scarce, where flowers and their fruits have little strength, in places destitute of friends and kin, defenseless, unprotected. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, on account of wrong views, the place where one is born is poor and completely without comfort and luxuries such as silks and jewels. Edible and medicinal plants and trees are few or none at all. Any fruits and flowers that may be eaten have almost no power of nourishment and bring no strength to the body. One falls victim to enemies and evil forces and is isolated without help or protection. So that's the effect in terms of the environment. And we'll look at the proliferating effect. What is that again? Penchikitebu? No. Chipetrebu. So 38. The proliferating consequence of acts performed produces, through great increment, unbounded sorrow. Thus, this prison of unbearable samsara is darker than the very dark itself. Through blades of pain upon the aggregates one has assumed, sensations hard to bear are all the recompense of sin. So right now we are looking at the negative actions. Of course, we're a mixed bag. So we are shaped by negative and positive actions, but these are basically in the present context discussing negative actions. These are then the various styles of effect of negative actions. So we're looking at the last category, proliferating effect, and Kangyur Rinpoche comments. In addition to the fact that actions like killing are connected with what happens in future lives, it is also true that their results increase with every instant. Every trivial act may result in immense suffering. This is also what we looked at earlier, that little actions can actually bring about great results. So one negative action is something that can become part of our particular pattern, and as such then it's something that is continually increasing. So Kangyur Rinpoche then, concluding here the discussion of negative action, says the ultimate nature of phenomena has, from beginningless time, been overlaid and concealed by the thick gloom of ignorance. So this is where we understand Buddha nature. The ground is pure. The ground is luminous, blissful, and so forth. But as long as we ignore this ground, as long as we're stuck in this condition, and this is not because we are bad, but because of simply just what we call loburkichima, which means adventitious stains or fleeting stains, just a condition of unconsciousness, mindlessness, then we get caught in the patterns of the self and the ignorance that solidifies self, other, the kleshas and the karma that then constitute this thick gloom of ignorance that veils the original ground of what we actually are. So So that's the basic ignorance. But we are affected by an even worse darkness, namely our deluded perceptions. So that's where within that, it's not just that we're sort of passive, but we're actually continually, on the basis of our ignorance, we're continually perceiving things in a particularly deluded, mistaken way, based on apprehension of the self of the person and the self of phenomena. So like I was just saying, this really is where ignorance leads to this fundamental misapprehension or misunderstanding of reality, in which the luminous ground is perceived in terms of a self, and you could say space is perceived as other. So that's where this delusion is then, in addition to the initial sort of, you could say, mindlessness or unconsciousness, it then emerges with this kind of perception of ourself versus other, or in relation to the other, duality, subject-object. So, Kangyur Rinpoche says, these proliferate constantly and completely blind us in this bitter, terrible prison of samsara, which is so hard to escape from. Our 5 aggregates must undergo long and unbearable torment, as though torn and slashed by knives. These are the consequences of the 10 non-virtues. Of all evil deeds, the worst are the 5 sins of immediate effect. So this is like killing a Buddha or an Arhat and so forth. These are to kill one's father, to kill one's mother, to kill an Arhat, to attack and injure a Buddha so as to draw blood, and to cause a schism in the Sangha. These actions are of immediate effect because they are so grave that their effect overrides any other karma, and at death the person concerned falls directly into hell without even passing through the Bardo state. So that's where we say this is immediate effect. What is it again? Samme kitikpa. It means there's no boundary, meaning we go straight down, so to speak. So that's the seriously bad actions, as well as the 5 similar to them, which such as destroying stupas, killing bodhisattvas and arhat, and other heinous crimes. Footnotes say. Altogether, these 5 are destroying a stupa, killing a bodhisattva, killing a practitioner on the noble path, robbing the sangha, and raping a female arhat. And then finally, there is then other heinous crimes. In this context, mention is also made of 16 grave actions and 8 wrong actions. Okay, let's see if they. Okay. So these are 4 gravely wrong actions. Lokpe chiwa. Sitting above a learned person, accepting prostrations from a fully ordained monk, stealing the provisions of a meditator, and stealing the ritual implements of a mantrika. So, not to do that. 4 gravely impaired action, nyampe chiwa. Chiwa means heavy. So the first is the wrong kind of heavy action or grave action. The second is then the impairing heavy actions. To swear coarsely by using the name of the 3 jewels, for ordained persons to act against Shravaka discipline, for practitioners of the Mahayana to violate the precepts of the Bodhisattvas, and for practitioners of the Mantrayana to violate the samayas or sacramental commitments. So the first actually is something that happens all the time, I know, in Tibetan culture. This is, it's like we say, oh my God, you know, we say that now and it's not really seen as that bad, but actually sometimes you'll probably find Christians who would say, no, please don't take the Lord's name in what's called in vain, right? I know the Tibetans, they'll say, yeah, konchok sum. Actually, it literally means 3 jewels, but it means sort of like, oh, good grief, you know. So that's where that even is actually not good. So so these are things to keep in mind. There's also the one earlier up here. What is it again? This one here. Stealing provisions of a meditator. Part of that is actually also when you go and visit retreatants. You bring supplies. You don't because retreatants very often are very nice people. They'll sort of serve you up tea and take out their cookies and stuff like that. So that's where they will probably naturally be very generous. So that's when you visit a retreat, make sure you bring along supplies so you're not depleting their supplies. Anyway, that's a little bit less grave. This probably doesn't fall under the grave category. 4 gravely disrespectful actions, mebechua. Out of ignorance, to have contempt for the physical form of a Buddha, out of pride, to have contempt for the qualities of learned people, out of jealousy, to show contempt for what is truthfully said, and out of partiality, to discriminate between religious schools. Okay. 4 gravely scornful actions, kurechua, cynically, to condone wrong views, to condone the shedding of a Buddha's blood, arbitrarily, to condemn among equals, and to make false and unfounded accusations. 8 wrong actions, lokpa. 1, to despise virtue. 2, to praise non-virtue. To upset a virtuous person. To interrupt the meritorious actions of a faithful person. 5, to abandon one's teacher. To abandon one's Yidam deity. To abandon one's spiritual kindred. And 8, to violate the sacred mandala in sadhana practice. Okay. So that's where we understand that innocent as sentient beings are, in the condition of ignorance, we then end up undertaking actions that very often are negative. Of course, also, there will be times where we are performing positive actions, but because of this toxic condition of the self, its insecurity and its, you could say, its continual failing. You can see we're always operating with the frustration that we're not getting what we want, and parting what we do want, and so on. There's all the time this unhappy situation. So that very often leads to negative actions. So we say predominantly samsara consists of places that are very unpleasant. So that's where, again, this is about us not sort of making some sort of ontological assessment of reality, but more just understanding the nature of confused experience. Okay, let's see if there's some questions. Our copy of Treasury of Precious Qualities does not contain the root text you're using. Yeah, I know, this is a complaint. I think the new edition of, I think the new revised edition actually has the root text at the beginning of the text. So yeah, I know, unfortunate. Should we buy another book? Well, what I'll do is I'll upload things. I think I already have uploaded, but I'll upload more up to and including this 3rd chapter in PDF form to our resource folder. Yeah. So, but otherwise, yeah, it might be a good thing to buy the revised edition. Yeah. I'm using the revised edition in Kindle form, so maybe just see if you can confirm that the printed version of the book actually does, the new revised edition does have the root text. What about, for example, the control of mosquitoes to help prevent illness and death from malaria? Well, yes, this shows the complexity of everything, right? Because of course we might kill, I mean, we cull animals, right? We kill off certain species. Sometimes we're not that wise in our dispositions in that regard, but yes. So that's where we can see how karma is naturally complex. Is it worse to kill beings who are more evolved? We seem to generally think like this: killing dolphins, gorillas, for our desire to eat meat, generally look more down upon them. Killing millions of insects for our desires for clean sheets. Yeah, absolutely. It's look, it's very hard to say. I wouldn't be able to say whether there's more what there's more or less karmic consequence of, you know. It's interesting, in the old China, there was some charts. I remember somebody showing me charts. There's the demerit or the negative karma associated with killing larger animals as opposed to killing smaller animals. So there might possibly be some sutras that speak about that. But of course, generally, it's all about what we're saying right now. We're not trying to establish some sort of karmic legislation, right? We're more about understanding that the nature of samsara is suffering, that we're continually engaged in actions that inevitably bring about suffering, like you're saying, you know, even just washing our clothes, drinking a cup of tea. And so the point here really is more the wish to not harm, to benefit others, and to achieve enlightenment so that we can free beings from this condition. How are our habits connected to karma? Well, our habits are produced by karma. Our habits are produced by dualistic perception and the patterns that this situation of duality once we have kleshas, I like this, I don't like that, we act, and these actions, they become part of us, and this we call vasanas. And they're like, it's a bit like, you know, when we talk about hardwiring, you know, hardwiring the brain, except we understand with our understanding of brain plasticity that actually this hardwiring can actually be changed. And we can actually see this, for example, in research, famously, you know, what's his name? Richard Davidson, and meditators that actually change their brain, right? So we can understand that there's a patterning taking place. So the way that our actions are laid down, they become the vasanas, or what we call habits for our karma. So on the basis of karma, we put down habits, and these habits then further solidify our karma. So you can say habits and karma are sort of very much linked together. Why is it that Dharma practitioners can experience great difficulty due to being sincere practitioners? Well, we would sometimes, oh gosh, there was somebody who sent me something, you know, I mean, sometimes, you know, it's almost as if when we become practitioners, it's as if negative karma arises, you know, as an act of purification. Okay, so I have here some quotes from Dinghu Rinpoche. How are we doing for time? Okay. This is Dinghu Rinpoche. He says, when you fall sick, experience pain, and encounter many adverse circumstances. Oh, sorry, he says, you will fall sick, experience pain, and encounter many adverse circumstances. At such times, do not think, although I am practicing the Dharma, I have nothing but trouble. The Dharma cannot be so great. I have followed a teacher and done so much practice, and yet hard times still befall me. Such thoughts are wrong views. You should realize that through the blessing and power of the practice, by experiencing sickness and other difficulties now, you are purifying and ridding yourself of negative actions. By purifying them while you have the chance, you will later go from bliss to bliss. So do not think, I don't deserve this illness, these obstacles, these negative influences. Experience your difficulties as blessings. When you do experience such difficulties, you should be very happy and avoid having adverse thoughts like, why are such terrible things happening to me? Yeah? So that's where we should train our mind and seeing this as blessings and really just rejoicing actually that we're going through difficulties now so that we don't have to go through these difficulties later on where we might not have the vantage point of having access to the teachings and being able to practice the way we have now. please, gosh, we might go a little bit over time. There's a few questions here. Okay. Please, can you explain about the phenomenon where negative actions are magnified many times on certain days, like the Kini days? Sometimes it seems as if bigger challenges are thrown up on these days, so one needs to be aware of the day and be extra mindful. Oh yeah, well, actually yesterday I had this I had a very nice session with Elizabeth Mattis Namgyal, many of you know, and she made such a good point at one point. You know, she says she used to think that teachers, they were knowers, you know, and actually she was commenting how Dingochen's Rinpoche always just seemed to be in awe and not necessarily meeting situations with sort of, you could say, some sort of frozen, judgmental knowing the situation. So that kind of openness. Anyway, I just thought about this sort of the idea of being in a position like I am here, sort of pretending that I know things, you know. Well, I can say very clearly right now, the science around the auspicious days and how they multiply, that's beyond me. I know that these are seen as particularly, you know, a lot of us are aware of how, you could say, the energy changes according to particular phases of the moon and so forth, and you know, all sorts of, you know, astrological conditions and so forth, which I don't know much about, but of course I respect them. And so also I respect, for example, we say the 10th day of the waning moon is the Dakini day, and the 10th day of the waxing moon is the Heruka or Rinpoche day. So that's where there is this knowledge, just like I know that my car is supposed to have certain things in order, but I honestly don't understand the complete mechanism. So I'll pass on that one. I'm afraid I can't explain exactly. All I will do as an end consumer is I'll say, okay, well, on these particular days, I should be aware. But exactly the reasoning of this, that is beyond me. Printed has it. Okay, I think that's referring to the root verses. So the root verses are included in the new revised edition. Yeah, yes, new version of the book has the root text. Good. For mosquitoes, for example, there exist nowadays repellents to protect oneself instead of killing them. That's true. That's true. Thank you. That's a lot we can do, actually. Hi, I feel to follow in absolute knowledge our effect upon the world, and the karma generates an endless cycle of pain. Would it not send you insane? No, that's the exact point, really. It's understanding, it's the empowered situation that we're not victims of, you could say, external, you know, agent, somebody who's sort of testing us. And it's not also just random, that it just happens for no rhyme or reason. It's actually that we're in a place right now where we can do something. So that's where right now we have a particular condition, and it's curable. The condition of samsara is a curable illness. So there's this empowered place of understanding that our actions have an impact and to know how to direct these actions. So it's the exact opposite of sending us insane. It's actually reassuring us, giving us a map, a clear direction about what to do. Do the consequences of one or two or half a dozen wrong deeds last for a lifetime? I don't mean murder, but issues like killing ants because they've inhabited your linen press and bite you every time you get a sheet or a towel out. Yeah, well, you know, of course, this again, here these conditions that we looked at earlier all apply, these 5 conditions, right? The intention, the following through, the act, and so on. And when they're not complete, the karmic action, of course, the karmic result is much less. So I hope you understand that. But of course, that's the thing. It actually it imprints on our. This is also what we were looking at earlier. It imprints on our what we call alaya vijnana, sometimes called the all ground or storehouse consciousness. So there's never ever a time where actions don't have an impact. Jakob, could you develop about self and others? What are the good and wrong ways to deal with this reality? Well, that's what the Dharma is all about, because we are presently within this dualistic context where we think self and others. So that's where in, you could say our culture, within the Western way of seeing things, it's a given. But it's in the Buddhist context, it's part of the confused projection with regards to our reality. So that's where we understand that at the level of absolute truth, this is an artificial construct. There is no ultimate self and other. But on the relative level where we experience self and other, then of course we then apply the remedy of the path. And that's essentially what the whole Buddhist teaching is all about. So the way forward here is how to deal with it is to practice the path in terms of, you say, virtuous actions, not to do any, embrace virtuous actions, abstain from harmful actions, and master the mind. How wonderful these quotes from Dinghu Rinpoche. Yes, somebody sent me this. In spite of all the teachings, such as about karma, I find we still fall back into our habits. For sure. We're on the path, right? So that's predictable, yes. It is very hard. Also, it's very hard to arouse renunciation mind. Again, yes, indeed it is. That's why we're on the path. Can you speak more about this? How to generate real renunciation and bodhicitta so Dharma is firm and center in our lives? Very good question. Yes, that is to have regular meditation sessions in which we precede the meditation sessions, particularly with what we call the 4 thoughts that change the mind that we're presently studying. So the present study here is about creating the conditions for us making the Dharma firm and center in our lives. So you have different, particularly in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, you have the practices of mudra, or preliminary practices, that include these reflections. And that's really something we do at the beginning of the session. We reflect on these. So it's very much about us shifting our perspective from being preoccupied with phenomena that don't have much impact or much consequence, such as all these sort of actions that we worry about this, or we worry about that, or fascinated with this, or amused by this or that, which of course we need to do on a practical level. But underscoring all of that, there has to be a foundation in which we're aware of these perspectives. And that's where we need to continually, again and again and again, familiarize ourselves with this. It's not like we can take a pill. It's not like all of a sudden we go, oh yeah, like that. It's something about we go, oh yeah, like that. And then knowing that we will forget it, we have to repeat that again and again and again. Can the seed of karma be completely purified without the ripening of the result? Or does some kind of ripening have to happen? That's a good question. We would say that yes, it can be purified. So there might be some effect that might subtly sort of unfold, but will unfold in a different way. I'm not exactly sure how to answer this, but we definitely would say that there's not, we always say the single good thing about negative actions is that they are purifiable. So I think we generally should operate from the position of saying that yes, they can be purified. Yeah, I would say maybe we're not able to purify them completely. There might be some subtle ramification that takes place, as long as we're not fully enlightened. But to a large extent, we can purify. Yeah. Okay, so we've gone a little bit over time. Hope that's okay. Thank you very much. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning. May we cross the ocean of existence in that life, thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world. May we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Thank you very much, and see you next week.